Hi, Faisal. Welcome to Better Than Fine.
Hi, thanks for having me, Darlene. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. And I think, I realize now I had intended to ask you if I could do this before we hit go, and now we've hit go, and so now you're stuck with me. Ha 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 ha.
Okay. Let's see what you ask.
But I think it's an intro to the listeners who've already, by now heard me actually recorded intro. We're recording this in a heat wave. I know it's quite warm where I am. It's quite warm where you are.
Yeah.
And a hard intro to the listener. You've lived all over the world. What's the hottest place you can remember being?
Yeah, the hottest place I can remember being is in Pakistan, which is my heritage is Pakistani. I was born and raised in England, but I've lived a part of my life in Pakistan as well. And over there, it's Celsius, it's centigrade. And I believe it was 48 degrees centigrade, which I think would easily go over 100 degrees Fahrenheit over here in the US in Fahrenheit. And yeah, it's really, really hot. But, as human beings, we adapt. And now, when it goes to like 90, which is around 30 degrees Celsius, it feels too hot. But yeah, that's the hottest where I've been, 48 degrees Celsius. And I think it's definitely more than 100 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, I agree with you about the adaptation. I grew up upstate New York, lots of snow. The only real hot month growing up was August, though now we're in the temperatures in June of what would normally be August.
Yeah.
But I know when I was studying yoga, I was in a tropical climate on like a literal tropical island. And it was, high 90s, and you're doing yoga 8 hours a day in an open air pavilion. And I eventually, by the end of it, it was fine. But it is interesting the way that we just shift physically in a way.
Yeah, we do. Actually, talking of tropical islands, I lived for a couple of years on the island of Guam in the middle of the Pacific, which is exactly that. And you're right. On top of the 90-degree weather, it's humid as well.
Yeah.
And I remember being there in December, and it was Christmas season, and I was used to Christmas, being, in either London or the US or somewhere cold, and it's all a white wintry Christmas. And I remember on Guam, it was a hot, humid, tropical Christmas, and it just didn't seem right for some reason, because we associate Christmas time with, Santa and snow and everything. So yeah, that's interesting dynamic that I got to experience.
Oh yeah, I've had a number of clients who always travel somewhere warm for the last 2 weeks of the year, and I've always had the reaction that you're describing, where I was like, I wouldn't want to do that for Christmas. That doesn't make any sense. But I feel like this has actually been a very nice intro to just scope and life experience.
Yeah.
In a way that my original intro question for you, I don't think would have done, because you have had, at least what I've read, and now hearing more and more depth, a pretty interesting and varied life. Went to the Wharton School. You've been an assistant professor at Penn. Of course, we know one another through the Master's in Applied Positive Psychology, but you have a pretty expansive corporate and consulting and coaching background that you've been infused with all of these other things that we often talk about on the show.
Yeah.
So how did you become interested in flourishing, in resilience? With, I think, engineering is in there, and just corporate management is in there. Like, what was the spark that added this infusion of this thing that we're all about?
Yeah, lots of people ask me that question, and I do have quite a diverse academic and professional background. So this is my second career now. My first career was in corporate finance and technology, and one would argue finance and technology are two very disparate professions as well. But I luckily was able to carry both of those along throughout my corporate career, either being in IT supporting finance organizations or being in finance supporting IT organizations in the corporate or the consulting world. And I remember, Darlene, when I was in the corporate world, especially after I started managing people, the favorite part of my job became just that, managing people. And I remember I would show up, I've got, a team meeting today. I've got my one-on-ones with my team today. And my peers would look at me like, what are you nuts? That's the stuff that we don't want to do. And you're so enthusiastic about it. And I just developed this keenness to have developmental type conversations with either colleagues of mine or people that I managed. And I started really getting what it meant when organizations would say, we want to create this type of a culture in an organization, or here's what we're trying to do culturally in an organization. And so once I started getting that, I found myself in conversations with other people, disseminating those messages. And then, so that was one thing, just developing a keenness towards culture in organizations or human behavior. And then the second thing was, once I started rising up the corporate ladder, I got exposed to different leadership development type trainings. And I would remember being in this, so-called fluffy trainings, how to be a better communicator, how to develop emotional intelligence and those types of things, really, understanding the concepts, but more so fantasizing being the front of the room leader, facilitating those workshops. I remember I was like, man, this is a really cool career that this person has. They're traveling the globe and teaching people how to be, more emotionally intelligent, or communicating more effectively, or negotiating a certain way. I would love to have that gig. And so I started retooling myself about, 7-8 years before I actually left the corporate world, gradually gaining new skills, getting trained in coaching, etc. And all of that culminated in about 2015, me just quitting my job cold. I was, doing really well in the corporate world, and I actually surprised everyone. And I said, I'm just doing on a full-time basis what my current role allows me to do on a peripheral basis, which is helping people grow and develop. And, then my journey with workshop facilitation and consulting in the employee well-being space and executive coaching started. And that's where I went to MAP to do the Masters in Applied Positive Psychology.
And that's how we encountered one another.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how we crossed paths and became part of the same community.
And an incredible community for anybody out there considering. Plug from the inside. It's great here.
It is the best community.
I mean, like, everyone who's not a Mapster just shut off, and everyone who is a Mapster just leaded. Like, yes,
probably
one of
the
this is
best
slowly
community.
becoming a map podcast. It's never been intended to be that, but I want to dial back a little bit in your narrative, because the undercurrent theme I'm hearing here is that in a corporate world that is supposed to be about profit, what you were always about was people.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how, the other big theme that I heard was that you followed that spark of interest to then accumulate skills and experiences that led you toward where you wanted to be. And I feel like so often right now, the advice that is being thrown at younger millennials, Gen Zs, around follow your passion, do your thing, don't go to college, don't take, I just think of Gary Vee is the one who's coming to mind. Right. And oftentimes you don't have the experience, you don't have the breadth and depth of knowledge to live fully in the thing you want to be doing.
Right.
But taking that time, that very intentional educational developmental time to build the puzzle pieces to get you where you wanted to be, instead of bemoaning that you weren't there. Yeah. I think those are two very important themes. I don't know if you want to speak to either one.
Yeah, I could. I'll start with the second one, which is, gaining from experience, learning from experience. I mean, even the top gurus, Gary Vee, for example, or anyone else for that matter, if you were to interview most people, say, okay, did you intend to end up exactly where you are right now when you first started? Most likely the answer will be no. Many times we start a career, we have ambitions, directionally we know where we want to go, but oftentimes our careers, they take us in different directions. We develop new interests. We figure out, oh my God, what I thought this was, it's not. I'm no longer interested in this. Or we find a certain niche in a particular field that we started, and we dive deeper into that niche. And so our careers evolve as we go along. And I think it's really important to ask ourselves, is the evolution going in the direction that I want it to go? And in my case, I started as an accountant, right? I was working with PwC, and accounting was it for me. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. What I loved was, as an auditor, as a consultant, going into different companies and understanding different industries, different sectors, and coming across different people. But after a few years of doing that, what I hated about it was the nature of the work was exactly the same. It was exactly the same. So what I started with a passion was, okay, I'm going to become an accountant, and I really enjoyed it. 3-4 years later, it's like, okay, yeah, I enjoy meeting different people, going to different companies, but the work is the same. And how can I add a bit of variety? And, this was about the late 90s, and, IT was really up and coming, and all these corporations were investing heavily in IT infrastructure. And I figured, you know what, information technology is a space that's constantly evolving, and it always will be. And so I will never find myself in a monotonous job if I ventured into IT. And so I diversified and went into IT, but I specialized in financial software. So keeping my financial background intact so I could carry both along. So I capitalized on my accounting background by staying within financial software, but then diversified into IT. And I think when I was starting as an accountant, if someone would have asked me then, 5-6 years later, do you see yourself going into IT? I would have said, no, I think I'm going to be established as a career professional in the accounting profession. And then, many years later, as I matured, I always say I grew up professionally in the corporate world. And I think you're very right in saying that, we gain insight, maturity, etc. We learn from our experiences. You gain confidence, talking to people, leading people, coming up with deliverables, being innovative in your thinking, creativity, etc. All of those things. And then I thought, okay, my thinking now is evolving. I believe I have matured to a certain extent, and there is growth for me, but I need to do something different. I need to really lean into what I'm thoroughly enjoying, which is the people development space. And how can I do that? And, after self-reflection, I realized I need to retool myself. I can't just capitalize on the notion that here's how I did it. Let me show you how, that will work for you, because what worked for me might not work for someone else. And that's why I decided to train on the psychology of human behavior. And that led me to positive psychology. Was, okay, psychologically, if I'm looking for, looking to help people develop, I need to come from a psychological underpinning, so to speak. And that's where my retooling started to happen. And the way I reconcile my entire background now is when I go into organizations and I consult or I coach, I can relate to people's experiences, because I can share from my corporate experience and say, I can relate to, burnout, for example, or work-life balance, or how to negotiate better, and all of those conversations that I end up having in organizations. I can bring that perspective to the table. And so I think the one characteristic that allowed me to pursue the things that I pursued was fearlessness, and just having the faith that, okay, as long as I'm passionate enough about this and I put in the work, even though it might be difficult, the end product will be pleasing, and I will have done something that I wanted to do, regardless of whether I succeeded or failed at it. I always had in my mind I might fail. If I do, I will always have the corporate, workforce to go back to and lean on. I'll always have my technology and financial background to lean on. Fortunately, I haven't had to do that, and I've been relatively successful. But that fearlessness definitely helped me figure out my way. And then, to your first point around in the workforce, where productivity and performance and those types of things are quite prominent, I just feel it was part of my upbringing. Relationships, caring for other people, was a natural part of me. And now I understand, after studying positive psychology, that just unknowingly I was able to capitalize on that throughout my corporate career and throughout my life. I think I continue to, which is prioritizing the relationships over the tasks or or any other thing, because the tasks will get done. People are there to get them done. How you value them and how you facilitate them and enable them to get them done is the job of a leader, is the job of a colleague, a peer, and how you lead from anywhere in an organization. And I think that's of extreme importance in today's working world in particular.
Oh yeah. Well, and to that point, and I'm totally stealing this from the episode where I interviewed Andrew Soren, and we talked about burnout as, it's individual and cultural. And, and I'm sure you're doing burnout workshops. I'm doing burnout workshops at this point, that you are both the pickle and the juice, right? You are the individual and the culture. And if you take a cucumber and soak it in vinegar, it's going to be a pickle. And so this idea that each of us, I'm glad to hear you say it's not just as a leader, it's also a colleague, it's a peer, it's a mentor, it's a student. At every step in the ladder, how are you being a community member contributing to the jar, the pickle and the juice? And what kind of jar do you want to soak in? And that it's all of these things, not just, so often I feel like right now we're talking about very much individual response to burnout, self-care. Am I taking vacations? Am I sleeping? How am I handling my anxiety? And, it's leadership. But it's all these points on the ladder. It's all the points in the web.
It most definitely is. And I don't believe that we will succeed in mitigating burnout in any workplace if we just focus on the individual. I think the organizations and everyone within the organization has a responsibility so that we can unpickle ourselves and create a thriving environment for cucumbers to grow left, right, and center. I love
all
that.
Of the people that know me metaphor. Off mic are going to will all know dill pickles are my favorite food. So this metaphor taking off means a lot to me.
And so, I agree with you very much. So the burden is placed on the individual. Even in organizations, I see organizations that really are trying their best to create cultures of well-being and really promoting it both internally as well as in society as well. However, when I go and coach many of the individuals within those same organizations, both at the leadership level and at the operational level, at the leadership level, they're saying, we have to meet our deadlines, and, the management is breathing down our necks. And, if I don't get this done, I might not survive in the organization. I'll be pushed out, and I have these targets to meet. So this is senior leadership saying these things. And so what they end up doing is role modeling, unfortunately, behavior that is not in line with avoiding burnout or burnout prevention or well-being, because they're sending out the emails at 10 o'clock at night, or, expecting an answer 8 o'clock in the morning from their teams. And the team member who I'm coaching is saying, well, I need to get promoted. I need to be seen as a doer. And, even if I take a break or, I switch off on the weekends, I have 10 other peers who aren't. And so I feel like I'm going to be viewed as a laggard. And, I am in an environment where I am more likely to be viewed as a laggard if I take time off, because my leader is under tremendous pressure as well. So it's this perpetual treadmill or cycle, unfortunately, that is very difficult to disrupt unless the very top senior leadership really models the behavior that discourages burnout, encourages more balance. And, as both you and I know about this, being students and practitioners of positive psychology, is it will result in more productivity. It's that people, it just seems counterintuitive to people. And the reasons for burnout can be mitigated whilst maintaining productivity. And then, if I may, Darlene, there's one last nuance around burnout, which is, which you alluded to, which is sometimes it's systemic. And so, I do a lot of work with surgeons at very large hospitals, physicians. Physician burnout, as you might be aware, is upwards of 50% in the healthcare field in general. Nurses and other healthcare.
Don't leave the nurses out. That's my family.
Yeah, and so that whole system it's almost like it's by design meant to burn you out. And, unless that whole system changes from the inside out, you can create, as many interventions as you'd like, but it will only have a limited impact unless the whole system changes. And so you have whole systems that are trying to deal with this. These types of systems involve people who one would think are very well informed around what burnout can do to us, the impacts on our well-being and our lives. But even they are struggling with these types of issues. So people like you and I and other colleagues of ours who are operating in this space are needed even more and more.
Yeah. Well, I think, to add to that, the other big system that comes to mind is the legal profession.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I've worked with quite a few lawyers over the years who are early in their careers, and they're sleeping 2 hours. And then this is back when I was training full time, coming into the gym on 2 hours of sleep and, only want to do high intensity work.
Yeah.
Because that's what's gonna, and I put this in soft quotes for the people who are listening and can't see the video, keep them thin, even though that doesn't actually work. And so that they can keep up with all of these different kinds of systemic stress of the look, the lifestyle, the especially in Lower Manhattan, the drinking, the lack of sleep, the kind of warrior mentality of I can handle this, and that's the proof, and that's what gets me promoted in a whole, not just the professional aspect, but like a whole image of that person in that system. And just a few weeks ago, I was doing a burnout workshop for law students and got this question that I'm now going to push to you is when you are an individual in a system, right? When you are a law student about to go off to get your first big law job at a firm, you are the bottom of the totem pole and you are in an industry, not just a culture of burnout, but an industry system of burnout. How does one even navigate that from whether it's from an individual perspective or, you're not competitive as a firm if you're not pushing that line?
Yeah.
How does one even start that ball rolling?
Yeah, it's very difficult. A difficult path to navigate. I think it boils down to what one wants out of life and the belief in what one can accomplish. When you're at the bottom of the totem pole, and I certainly have been there more than once, it's it's difficult. You want to create the best impression, especially if it's your first, professional job out of college or university. You want to create an impression and you want to do the best job possible. You want to rise up the ranks as soon as possible. There's so many pressures and concerns. Having the wherewithal, the savviness, or developing the savviness, and this is why I think having mentors to guide you along is really important. How to navigate the political landscape so you can have those difficult conversations with the people who are managing you or with the people who might develop the incorrect perception about you. The workforce is all about perception. The people we hire, the people we fire, the people we choose to work with, the people we want to spend more time with at work is all about perception. And arguably, and this comes out in personality sciences when we study these, is, perception in the workforce and in the world. People we marry, right? People we lend money to, people we want to, be associated with, people we befriend. It's all based on our perception of others. And so managing one's perception becomes really important. How can you negotiate with your manager or with people that you're working with? Like, look, I want to do the best job possible. I'm sure you want me to do the best job possible as well.
Oh, I do.
Right. And so your success, I understand I am a part of your success and you are a part of mine. I will operate the best way possible if, I take care of my own well-being and my health. Don't expect me to produce 110% on 2 hours of sleep. It's just humanly, naturally impossible to do. However, allow me to take care of myself and I will do the best job possible. That's what I was referring to as the wherewithal and the savviness to have those conversations. If you have understood these things and can have those conversations with confidence, and if you can't, then seeking out mentorship on how to navigate those difficult conversations, I think that's a small start. That's a small start. I wouldn't recommend that being the first conversation that you have when you join the workforce. So assess the culture and the situation, and where appropriate, have that conversation with the appropriate people. So seeking mentorship, having the confidence to do that. And then lastly, I would say either seeking out people who you can ally with and who can help be your advocates is a useful tactic as well. There's a really interesting story, Darlene, that a CEO of one of the top pharmaceutical companies in the world that I once worked for told me. And I was seeking career advice from this CEO. He was the CEO of GSK, the famous British pharmaceutical company. A young, dynamic individual, rose to become the CEO in his mid-40s, very well-accomplished individual. And he was telling me his story when he first joined the company. There was a clash between him and his manager, and they just didn't get along, and their values didn't align for whatever reason. And he was up and coming in the management ranks, and he left the company because he saw that his values were more important than him succeeding at the job and just simply pleasing his manager. And that's what I meant when I said it depends on what you value in life. Right? So if you value your well-being, and if you are a lawyer, you're well equipped, there's no guarantee that you join the top law firm in New York, that you're going to rise to the top ranks and you'll be successful. You might be successful, you might be wealthy, but will you do that at the cost of your well-being and everything else in your life? And what the research shows is that depression and suicide are quite prominent in the legal profession, in the physician space as well. And so what do you value in life truly? You can be successful in other organizations, in other capacities as well. So don't stick to one story, like this is my only one path, and that is the only path to success. And in pursuing that, you are sacrificing so many other things in your life. So he left the company, going back to his story. A few years later, he got a phone call from someone, a colleague of his at GSK, and saying, remember that person that you didn't get along with? Well, that person has left the organization. So if you want to come back, you can come back. And he did come back, and then he rose to become the CEO of the company. It's such a fascinating story. And I remember what he was indirectly saying to me was, because I was kind of complaining to him about something. And he said, look, it's important that your values align with the company values. And if they don't, there's no harm in leaving, finding another organization where they do. I think we become fearful. And, going back to why I said, I believe I was fearless in pursuing different things throughout my career, we become fearful and we allow those fears to determine the path of our lives. This is our life. And unless we take control of it and make decisions, every decision that we can possibly make to suit us, to lift us upwards and forwards in life, we're allowing other things, around us to make those decisions for us. And so I think a bit of fearlessness is also warranted for, people in that dilemma where they're starting in the workforce and the demands are really high, and they're navigating all of these different nuances as they desire to be successful.
Well, I think you gave a lot of good advice in there. So I want to just appreciate the value of each drop of this wisdom. I'm churning along with you. And not just some of the advice you gave, not just for someone just starting out, right? Someone who's right on the precipice of a transition they know needs to happen, but they're fearful of stepping out, of ripping the Band-Aid off, of making the pivot. But underneath what you've been describing, the thought that keeps coming to mind for me is social contract. Employment is a social contract that we have been raised to think of in our, at least, in the cultures that we are in, capitalist cultures, that it is an obligation as opposed to this, okay, I give you time, energy, expertise, resources, whatever, you give me a certain amount of, currency to store the value of all of these things that I've just traded to you.
Yeah.
And one of the things you're describing underneath that is the cost, not the price, but the cost of your own values, your own worth, your own self-esteem, your health, your well-being, your peace of mind, your lack of anxiety. Like we can layer as many things on this sandwich as we want.
Yeah.
But often when I'm coaching people on this precipice moment, it's like, okay, you're telling me all about the price and dollars that you are receiving, but you're not giving any weight to the cost of what you're giving to this, whatever that, career endeavor is. And I just hear that underneath of like, this CEO's values was a cost he was not willing to spend.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a conversation that we need to have more frequently and more often, right? At what cost are you pursuing all of these things? And, cost to you personally, cost to the things that are important to you. And I think as a society, we are so focused on material wealth, material gains, that we have forgotten the value of non-material wealth or pursuits that truly lead to contentment in life. I mean, how many studies are there that show, beyond a certain limit of wealth or income, right? Ed Diener, I think it was what, $70,000. And even though it goes back a few years, okay, let's say it's $80,000 right now or something on those lines. Once your basic needs are met, then it's only incremental gains that wealth can provide you. And when I ask people in coaching conversations, what do you desire? What do you want? And I hear answers like, I want to be, rich and I want to be wealthy, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, yeah, but what else is that going to provide you? And
what's it for?
Yeah, what's it for? And, I find, Darlene, that people have a really hard time describing those things.
Yes.
And the descriptors are mostly material things, like I want to go on vacation or, and I think that is a narrative that we need to explore further is, okay, what is contentment in life? What is fulfilling in life? What are those values in life that are worth pursuing? And once we understand those things, then we can start understanding, oh my God, yeah, that's the cost. Oh my God, that's what I'm sacrificing. I'm sacrificing peace of mind. I never even thought what peace of mind was before, right? And so those are the things I think we need to spend more time understanding the vocabulary and the language of what these things are to start with. By the way, as you're familiar with this, Darlene, none of this is easy. This is really difficult.
Yeah. Thank you for owning that.
Yeah. So I don't want any of your listeners to think, oh my God, who's this guy saying you're a newbie at a firm, just go and have that conversation. No, very difficult things. Everything
and
is
not what
difficult.
You said. Not what you actually said. What you actually said was go in, build relationships, find a mentor, then have that conversation.
Then have
their guidance. Which highlights that it is a process. And some of what you just said about wealth acquisition, I feel like directly mirrors a lot of the conversations I have around fitness or health and lifestyle management. A client comes on and, well, I got to get my weight down. Why? Because I'm too heavy. Well, heaviness is, it's just your relationship to gravity on this planet. Why? And they don't know. How do you want to feel? Mind blown. Because all they know is that they don't want to feel like they feel right now.
Right.
But there's no sense of target other than avoidance, which is part of the title. I know I told you this already today, but it's like part of the title of the show is the goal is not to get not uncomfortable. The goal is to build a life you don't need a vacation from.
I love that.
And that has nothing to do with money.
Though
I am my own education and Caucasianness, like my own woke alarms are going off in terms of privilege.
Yeah.
And I do think that there is an argument to be made here that some of what we're talking about is from a place of privilege, but I also think there's an argument to be made that what we're seeing right now in the workforce that is refusing to work for below a living wage for $11 an hour is people waking up to the fact that they're being devalued in what's supposed to be a capitalist market.
Yeah.
That, well, you're not paying me enough to sacrifice my life and my well-being and my mental health to stand there and like scan barcodes and get yelled at by people because their Taco Bell order is wrong.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you know, the dilemma that such people are in is that, you know, there's no shortage of replacements for those people. And so you're complaining.
But right now we're seeing a workforce shortage because they won't pay enough in some markets to get people to want to work for a soft quotes minimum wage that is not livable. So I hear what you're describing, this dilemma, but at a certain point, the capitalist push-pull, like I feel like we're hitting a massive society. The last year has taught many people to value their well-being enough to not be willing to be machine cogs.
Yeah. And I think that's, you know, going to be more a drive for automation and, you know, the use of technology to do all of those tasks that are, you know, simple enough to be automated with more and more complexity as time goes on and technology evolves, and further placing people who are taking on low wage jobs, you know, into such dilemmas going forward as well. It's a vicious circle, it seems.
It does. And I think also a divergent thread that maybe wasn't where we thought we would go, but worth unpacking when we have it's as the cost of these values conversations, right? Like I'm not going to say it's like you just said, it's hard, right? It's hard to decide, you know, my own corporate trajectory. And during my MAP year, during my grad school year, deciding, you know what, I just can no longer work for a major multinational fitness corporation that their values are so misaligned with mine. I cannot make myself do it another day and quit while in grad school to start my own thing.
Right.
That is a hard decision to make. And so I'm not saying it's easy, but the equal cost of these values conversations from our position, where we're the ones out there doing it and succeeding, and so therefore we have success bias, right? Well, I did it, so can you. Is the person who maybe doesn't have your charisma, your communication skills, your network, and feels like they can't leave that job because this is the best they're going to do. Right. And so there is a cost to fearlessness for those who aren't whatever all those things are that you are. Right.
True. Yeah. That's a really important point. One worth considering is, what does that person do? And so, you know, what is it that one can try on the side, do on the side? I mean, when I went down the road of, you know, transitioning from finance to technology, it was something brand new for me. I hadn't ventured in that space before. Then when I ventured from, you know, finance and technology into coaching and psychology, something completely new for me. And during those times, I was in different levels of my career as well. And so arguably one could say, oh my God, you're going back, stepping, you know, three steps backwards, and you're starting from scratch again. You're kind of, you know, peers of yours, you know, will continue to move forward in their chosen profession that they stuck with, and you're going to be a peer now of a newbie who's just specializing in that one niche, technology, positive psychology, what have you. And yes, that might be the case. It might be the case, but one will only know unless one tries. And so the narrative that we build in our minds very much dictates the next steps that we're going to take. And I think, you know, going back to that fearlessness, also having hope, and, you know, I'm throwing in some positive psychology lingo here now, optimism, an optimistic mindset, and the attitude, for lack of a better term, that, okay, how can I take a calculated risk? So, for example, when I transitioned from finance into technology, it was a calculated risk. Okay, I can always rely on finance again. When I moved from technology into positive psychology, and then I started my own business, okay, I can always go back to the corporate world. And so what I would encourage people to think about is, regardless of their, education level, profession, etc., is to experiment and take calculated risks. Don't have a heated conversation with your boss saying I quit, and without having a backup plan. Have that at the appropriate time, maybe, then quit, and then have some kind of a plan in place that, if it doesn't work, the new thing that you've started, you have something as a backup. And that involves, a lot of networking, a lot of building connections, capitalizing on things that you're good at, whatever those skills, abilities, talents of yours are, and then taking those calculated risks. And then what you're doing is you're vetting your assumptions as you're going along. Then you're living life by design. You are designing your life, and you're a designer, and you are carving your path as you go along. We can always have the intention of succeeding and going in a particular direction. And we can always put our utmost towards achieving that direction or that North Star or that goal. But the outcome will always be uncertain. We will always be faced with uncertainty. I mean, even if we have a job in today's day and age, there is no certainty. That certainty used to exist like 20, 25 years ago. Now you can't have that certainty, even in a corporate job, corporate role. It could be outsourced, technology could take over, you could end up, in a job that, is demotivating to you, whatever it is, it's always uncertain. And so latching onto certainty that this will happen if I stay tethered to this, I think is a kind of a false hope. What you should latch onto instead is, I'm going to try my best. I'm going to meet these milestones. If they work, they will. If they don't, then I'll pivot and do something else. And that is a lifelong process that you have to continually prepare for, so that when the pivot moment arises for you, you are well tooled and enabled to take that step. So for me, that was 5-6 years of retooling myself, doing all the work, having all the conversations, doing all the research, etc., so that in 2015, I could walk to my employer and say, okay, I'm leaving now. And so that's, again, difficult to do, but requires a lot of planning. But in doing so, in taking those routes, at least in my case, it's just so satisfying, because you are carving out your path. And that in and of itself produces such satisfaction, regardless of whether you succeed or fail. And I didn't succeed, as soon as I started my business. It took me a few years. I wasn't successful at all when I first started. Yeah.
And I want to highlight, you've brought up a few times this starting over, reboot concept.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that's important for those of us who've had multiple careers, and while much of what I'm doing now is an extension of my work as a trainer, much of what I'm doing isn't training.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be argued to also be a third career, that oftentimes you're carrying forward skills and abilities that you've learned in that previous iteration of your professional self, right? I used to be an actor. A lot of the storytelling, narrative, attentive listening, reflective statements from my improv days feed directly into producing the show. Very right. Good. And would I be able to be good on the mic if I didn't have, 12 years of acting experience that were 10 years ago? Yeah. I don't know. But I think that anytime we have to do Tim Ferriss likes to say, like, oh, you're climbing the ladder, make sure the ladder's on the right wall. Well, even if I climbed 2 or 3 ladder worths up over here and I need to go over there, well, I really know ladders now, right? Even if I have to move it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's tremendous wisdom in what you just said. Yeah, you capitalize on your strengths, right? And that's what I call coming from a position of strength. And there's a positive psychological definition of strengths. What's right with you, and you have character strengths, strengths of character, doing things for their own sake, kindness, generosity, and fairness, and perseverance and creativity and the like. But then coming from a position of strength, Darlene, I like what you said. Your previous talents, abilities, things that you've learned and nurtured over the course of your career, it's not like they're going to waste. You can capitalize on those. And that's what would allow you to continue to move forward. So you're right. You're not starting from scratch, all the way from scratch. You're actually at a really good position because you have harnessed what you've gained so far through life experience or professional experience, etc. And you are using those to your advantage in the right manner. And that takes a bit of wisdom and planning as well. How can I fit my strengths? And that's what makes us unique from each other. That's what differentiates me from someone else, because now I'm unique because of my experiences, truly unique. And if I'm vying for a job or a position or something, how can I bring that uniqueness to bear so that would be advantage to me and to those around me?
I think so often when we have that moment of pivot, when we choose to leave a corporation, an industry, whatever that previous iteration of self, even if we're choosing this design step that you're talking about, and it is so satisfying to be like, yep, I decide when I work, I decide who I work with, I decide who my projects are, I decide who my guests are, like I get to choose. Yeah. And it does feel it's like, your tailor, my custom made gown, it fits me just right.
Sure.
But, my train of thought just left the station. I'm standing on the platform. I love when I do that. Nope, it's gone now.
Oh,
it's
was
gone.
It around strength, coming from a position of strength, or living life by design?
Oh, it was so often that when we have those moments of pivot where we're leaving something behind, we identify with failure, right? If I was actually really good at this, I wouldn't have to leave. If I was actually ... or even ending relationships, right? As someone who, I ended a 12-year marriage. Ending that marriage was unquestionably the right choice for both of our happiness and well-being long-term. Mm-hmm. It still sucked. And there's still this internal dialogue of it failed. Well, no, it ran its logical conclusion, and two responsible adults looked at one another and said, I love you so much. I don't want you to live like this. Yeah. That's an ultimate success. Yeah. If what you're looking for is people actualizing and having well-being and being happy. Yeah. And so I think the reframe from the strengths perspective is, well, what did I learn? What skills did I gain? Yeah. How did I grow? Yeah. What did it teach me? Instead of, I just couldn't hack it in the corporate world anymore, so I had to go work for myself because I'm unemployable or whatever.
True. Yeah, I think that type of introspection is really important. And I think it's easy to say, and many people say this, learn from your mistakes and your failures, etc. But it really takes deep introspection to really learn from your mistakes and move forward so that you don't repeat them, or you really are insightful enough to glean out the nuanced learnings that are worth capitalizing on in the future, mistakes worth avoiding in the future. And, to your point of people, might think that they have failed because now they have to switch directions. Yeah, I agree with that point. That could easily enter one's mind. But at the same time, there are no guarantees, going back to the uncertainty, right? And that's the uncertainty piece that I was alluding to earlier. Nothing is certain at the end of the day. There are no guarantees that if one had stayed, an old course that they were previously on, they had stayed it, they would have ended at a happier place or somewhere else, etc. That too is an assumption and a thought. And now the only thing you have to capitalize on is the benefit of that experience. And as sad or as sorrowful as it might be, it's still an experience that we can learn from. And, you know this as well as I do, Darlene, that, in positive psychology, it's not just all about the positive experiences, it's about learning from the negative as well. And that's a positive psychological spin, for lack of a better term, from learning from our mistakes, our failures, and the pivots that we've taken in our life. Is what is the benefit of that, and how is that going to strengthen me? How is that going to allow me to improve my life, my well-being, and what I stand for? And that, again, I think is also coming from a position of strength. Is okay, yep, I changed, I pivoted. Some might view it as failure, some might view it as something else. Even if you view it as such, what can I gain from that experience? How can I do this differently? Going back to the CEO story that I was telling earlier, he could have quite easily said, oh my God, I was rising up the ranks in that company, didn't get along with my manager, I left it. And I'm sure, his family must have said to him, are you mad? Are you crazy? You're leaving your job, etc. But guess what? It was uncertain. He didn't know what was going to happen in the future. And 20 years later, he becomes a CEO. So, you don't know unless you try. So yeah, it's an uncertain journey, but definitely one worth taking as we learn from our experiences.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of what we're talking about today too is how we frame it for ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. Like, am I, and this kind of speaks to that optimism, pessimism dynamic you were alluding to earlier. Is like, when I realize it's time for a pivot, am I telling myself, well, that's because I always, and actually my mom will kill me if she listens to the episode. I'm going to use my mother as the example. Yeah. Most of my family and my mom, right up to my mother's generation, they had their jobs, they were in their lane, and they stayed in their lane their whole lives. Like, some of them right up until the day they left this earth. My mom, growing up, was switching jobs every couple of years. And oftentimes it was because like a work environment became toxic. She got the opportunity for promotion. This one was going to pay her for education, which she highly valued, much to my betterment. And so she took a lot of heat from our family for just taking a new job. Yeah. Now she is, a VP as a nurse in the largest hospital network outside of New York City and New York State. Wow. She does an incredible job. She helps lots of people. This is why I love nurses so much. But being willing to shake the jar of the paradigm of your culture of origin, because what you're in isn't it. And you're just going to keep like reshaking the jar until you land where you want to be. Yeah. So we've covered many diverse topics today, almost none of which is what we plan to talk about, which I love. But one thing we did plan to talk about was, and I don't know if you talk about any of these things in your Facebook group, but you have a Facebook group for professionals that I think we should mention. Sure. Do you talk about these things in your Facebook group, or are we just way out in left field right now?
Yeah, no, I do. We hint at them, but the group is more themed around three things: burnout, beating burnout, creating more balance in one's life, and being happy. And it's specifically for working professionals, although anyone can benefit from it. And it's the way to join that group is positivepsychologyforprofessionals.com. And so it's a number 4, positive, which will be linked. Number 4.
Linked in the show notes.
Okay, great. and so yeah, I talk about those things, and I do little video blurbs every now and then, and Facebook Lives, etc., around topics of this nature. And I think, burnout, work-life balance, and happiness in life, particularly for working professionals, are all intertwined. If you're burnt out, you're likely less balanced in life, and that will compromise your happiness as well. And so the theme is, the thread that links them all is actually well-being. And in order to pursue a life of well-being, it's very important that you counter burnout, create more balance, and live a fulfilled life. And the tools that we explore in that group are from positive psychology, and how to use resilience and positive psychological tools to help you achieve those things is the theme of it. Yeah.
I can't help but laugh because everything you just said is what we were going to talk about.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that we should have you back on the show to talk about resilience, work-life balance, avoiding burnout, because they are so, I mean, not just relevant right now, but relevant. I feel like they are perennially relevant.
Yeah, absolutely.
And your website, Number One Extraordinary Life, which will also be linked in the show notes.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. My website has a lot of my video blogs on there as well, and they're themed between. So, when I talk about balance in life, there's balance in the things that we do, but there's also balance within us. And I talk about balance as alignment across our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. And the more they are in alignment, the more likely we are to be happy in life. Obviously, because they're in alignment, we internally will be more balanced and content, and will be more likely to avoid burnout. And so I have separated my video blogs recently into those three themes. So thought related, emotion related, and behavior related things. So if you want to learn some snippets on, how to engage in behaviors and activities that promote that type of alignment, my website would be a good place to go to.
Yeah, I knew we were meant to be friends. So the style of yoga that I'm trained in and practice is alignment yoga, and foundationally, much of what you just described is at the basis of that pyramid. That if we extend the behavior into the body itself, that the body itself has an optimal alignment with which it will function. And energetically, spiritually, like everything along these platform of what you're describing. So clearly I'm on board with that train.
Good stuff.
And I think I'm gonna end with an end cap question for yourself.
Sure.
What practices have you been using in your own life to sustain your alignment? Your resilience, avoiding burnout, everything in the last year. How has it shown up for you?
Yeah. I think the one intervention or activity, if you will, that has two actually, that have had profound impacts on my own well-being. I started, one of these practices as early as I believe 2008. So by now it's very much a part of my lifestyle, and that is taking breaks. And there's a lot of research on this. Sabine Sonnentag is organizational psychologist who's done a lot of research on the power of taking breaks and how it can help us prevent burnout. Throughout the day, just taking a few minutes at a time to break away from whatever it is you're doing. So, my home office right now, and I'll go out, after this call. I was out before this call as well. Just, soak some of the sun, take a walk around my house, or, I don't know, do the dishes, do the laundry, anything that will take me away from my work just for a few minutes, and then I'll come back. And what that does is that disrupts the cycle of stress, because as you're aware, the World Health Organization says that burnout is caused by chronic workplace stress. And so anything to disrupt that stress cycle, because we're stressed when we're working, we're in front of screens, we're focusing, that induces a certain type of stress. So breaks is one thing. And another form of break is after work, I disengage from work. Not just physically, I have a separate area at work. And if you don't, to pack your laptop up, whatever it is, but emotionally and mentally. I try not to talk about work. It's very difficult when I'm talking with my friends because they all want to be coached, it seems. And I'm like, no, you're talking to Faisal the friend, not Faisal the coach. I'm off work hours right now. But mentally and emotionally detaching from work is another form of break, which is longer. And then the next day in the morning, when you engage back mentally, emotionally, and physically, you can be that much more productive. So the first thing was breaks. The second thing is I have my notifications on my phone switched off.
Me too.
They are off. I don't get a notification for email or text or anything else. They are just off. Barring if I am expecting an important text, for example, my parents want to call me, or I'm expecting something from, a business client of mine, then temporarily I'll switch it on. When I get that email or text, etc., then I'll switch it back off. And I think that's one of the best things we can do to avoid being addicted to our phones. And that way I control when I answer, when I respond to emails, etc. And I set that expectation with my clients, with my work colleagues. You expect this from me. I'm not going to be answering texts immediately, not going to be answering emails immediately. I've set times when I do that stuff. And so I set that expectation, and that makes it easier. So those two things allow me to be more in control of my life and create a little more balance. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No,
It's
I like
really
long
worked
answers.
for me. Yeah.
We like rabbit holes on Better Than Fine. Yeah, I'm reminded of two things. The notification, I'm reminded of Scott Barry Kaufman, for the listener, is the author of Transcend, and you should totally go read his book. His bounce back email that he leaves up all the time, as if it was like a vacation out of office, is to expect to not hear within 24 hours because he doesn't live on email. Yeah. And so if you email SBK, you get a bounce back that says, you're not going to hear from him right away, deal with it. Which I think is brilliant. And I've toyed over the last year of whether or not I was going to do that myself.
I'm going to use that too now. Thanks for
it's so good. Yeah. Email Scott and you'll get it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was reminded of is Matt Cook, who is an author, speaker, thought leader based out of Australia. He talks about the distinct difference between Matt, which is his public persona, his published name. And he's, I think it's cultural that they use the phrase his intimate name is Matthew. And so everyone in his private life calls him Matthew.
Interesting.
And peek behind the curtain, almost everyone in my close circle calls me Dar, but nobody professionally calls me that. Everyone calls me Darlene. And so Coach Darlene is a distinctively different being in myself than, Dar's way more grumpy. But I think this idea of, it sounds a little crazy, but playing with our own sense of identity, that my work identity and my off the mic, off the camera identity aren't the same person. I think Esther Perel talks about this for herself as well. Right. That the persona on the podcast and in the books isn't who she is when she's at home having dinner, and that's okay.
Yeah. And what you're doing is you are bringing intention into your work and into your private life. And I think that's a really cool way of living, being intentional. What do my customers need from me? They need Darlene. What does my family need from me? Family needs Dar, right? Subconsciously, we do this anyway, Darlene. We do this anyway. We switch certain parts of ourselves on and certain parts of ourselves off when we're in different spaces, in front of different people, etc. But being deliberate and intentional about which version of me is best suited for this. How can I add value to this situation right now? That level of intentionality is really important. So thanks for introducing me to that concept. I wasn't aware of the identity, link to this, but it makes complete sense. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that I think is interesting to play with then is, the pushback I've received from others is sometimes like, oh, but that persona then lacks authenticity.
Yeah.
And no part of my professional coaching person isn't authentic to me. Yeah. It's just the version I'm choosing to present to my client because it facilitates what they need in order to move forward.
Yeah.
And very often I encounter, for me, it's fitness professionals, because that tends to be who I interact with as a peer group, that have no boundaries with their clients.
Yeah.
Their clients tell them things that they shouldn't be advising on. They're telling their clients things that their clients shouldn't know about them. And it creates a really muddy water.
Yeah.
Because there's no separation for that, soft quotes, authentic fitness person out there just, being themselves and not actually able to help facilitate a productive process for their client.
Yeah.
So my pushback is always that it's a lack of professional boundaries.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. And in addition to that, there's something else that's coming to mind. And actually, you introduced this as you were telling me about this concept. You use the word being, right? You're choosing to be a certain version of yourself. And I doubt that, for example, Dar and Darlene are so far apart that you wouldn't be able to recognize the two. There probably is some overlap between the two. The intentionality is on the being piece, and using strengths-based language, this concept of being and doing, right? We're doing things, but when we bring the intentionality of being a certain way, we make the choice. Okay, who do I need to be? Okay, the authentic version of Faisal is really angry inside because he's triggered by something. But what will serve the world better right now? Is it that authentic, angry version of Faisal? No. A kind, generous, compassionate version of Faisal, an empathetic version of Faisal. Faisal, you're angry because you're triggered by something, but you need to focus on the other person over here who isn't triggered and they're going through some kind of situation. Help them. Now, that authenticity, that's a reaction of mine. But is that best suited in that situation? No. I need to switch on a kinder, compassionate, empathetic version of myself. And that's a different version of Faisal than a truly authentic of me just lashing out at this person based on my anger. So naturally, we choose to be certain versions of ourselves in different contexts and different situations. And what I particularly liked about what you said was you're bringing that intentionality. And, you mentioned that part of that intentionality is to create boundaries, to not muddy the waters. And, that's all to keep your sanity, and to, elevate your well-being as well. We have to take care of ourselves. And there's no one size fits all, one-stop solution that will suit everyone. And so we will find the happy medium for ourselves. And then that's what we can continue to work with. It's an experiment at the end of the day.
I could honestly just talk to you forever, because I have
another riff. Too.
I have another riff, because this riff of, well, I've been triggered. I'm triggered to anger. I'm triggered to reactiveness. I'm triggered to whatever. Mm-hmm. And I'm in a situation where, like, depending on what cultural paradigm you subscribe to right now, being triggered then gives me the ammo to be like, no, I'm triggered. You are not allowed to trigger me. Push back, push back, push back. Yeah. But I would argue that depending on context, like you're saying, my triggering is about me. Mm-hmm. It's about my past, my trauma, my unresolved lessons, my belief system.
Yes.
And how I come back at that person is going to influence what they take away from that moment. Yeah. So and very often I see this in at-risk spaces where you've got someone who is just plain ignorant. And I am in a rural white Trump county right now. Right. Like, there are a lot of people who don't get a lot of what's happening in our country right now. Mm-hmm. And often it genuinely is they just don't understand, or they've been misinformed. Yeah. So if my triggering, my reactiveness causes me to lash out, I am confirming everything they think. Yeah. And pushing them further down their rabbit hole. True. But like you're describing, if I choose, okay, I'm going to go examine that trigger later. Like there's something underneath that I need to work on. Got it. Thank you for the information, trigger. Yeah. Yeah. And then also respond with compassion, leading questions. Suddenly, I now have an opportunity to conversation with somebody who was never going to learn what I now have this opportunity to teach them from a place of vulnerability and patience. Yes. Yeah. Instead of just screaming at them and then they never listen to any of us. Yeah. Yeah. Precisely. And I think that is the being piece that you mentioned earlier. You're choosing to be a certain version of yourself. And the Dar versus Darlene and the Matt versus Matthew, I think that's a version of that. My customers, when I'm Matt, demand something of me. They expect something of me. And for me to be of service to them, I have to take on that persona. Otherwise, maybe I won't be as valuable to them as I want to be, as I choose to be. And then I can't be that version of myself 100% of the time, right? I have to switch off. Yeah, it's exhausting. So I have to switch off. And that version is a different version of me.
And, it's a version that is, whatever I need for myself. And so the, life, and, again, I talk about this with, balance in life. It's all about oscillation. It's oscillation between what versions are you switching on, what versions are you switching off. Without that oscillation, it's impossible to thrive. And, Darlene, you know more about this than I do by virtue of your personal training experience and coaching. You don't train 7 days a week. You don't train the same muscle groups, right? You take a break. You oscillate between, biceps and, quadriceps and shoulders and what have you. And it's in that oscillation that the muscles grow, and we grow in a similar manner by switching certain parts of ourselves on and off, both, in our thought processes, emotionally as well as behaviorally. And those personas that you mentioned, perhaps they enable that more consciously, so that we can grow.
I think this is a beautiful button. I think of it as cycles more than oscillations, but I do like the overlap in the metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll link to your websites in the show notes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time and your generosity of thought.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really, really enjoyed this. And hopefully we can do it again.
Oh, yes. I think we need to have you back to talk about the things we actually
talk.
wanted to talk about today. This is a nice plug for episode 2.0 of Fossil, when we actually talk about how resilience contributes to burnout, to fighting back burnout and work-life balance, and what that actually looks like.
We'll make it happen.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Take care, darling.